Community Futures launches with a dynamic lineup, as Stephen Jordan, CEO of the Institute for Sustainable Development, steps in as moderator to spark innovative conversations about our cities tomorrow. Joining him is Dr. Bill Bersing, CEO of iPrograms. With decades of hands-on experience leading major construction projects, Dr. Bersing brings a practical engineering perspective to building resilient urban infrastructure. Steve Cauffman, retired from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, rounds out the panel. His work in national resilience policy has shaped how cities plan for the future and respond to challenges. Together, this expert panel tackles the big questions. How do we design cities that thrive in the face of rapid change, climate pressures, and aging infrastructure? Dr. Bersing dives into the nuts and bolts, explaining how robust engineering and smart maintenance can help cities withstand both daily stresses and extreme events. Steve Cauffman highlights how strong standards and effective policy guide smart investments, making urban systems safer and more adaptable. When engineers, policymakers, and community leaders unite, resilient cities become possible, ready to weather both everyday challenges and tomorrow's surprises. Community Futures is more than a podcast. It's a call to action. With expert voices leading the way, cities everywhere can build infrastructure that powers sustainable growth and strong communities for years to come.
You know, you were in Italy for a while, you were just in France. How does American infrastructure compare to what you saw in Europe?
Sure. I think in some ways the infrastructure is better maintained. In other ways, it is old, but it works.
Yeah.
The Paris Metro, for example, it's an old. It's a system that was built in 3 phases, and it works. It runs on time. Stations are, serviceable, but definitely older. The roads were in very good condition, even department roads when I was cycling. Generally, I would say better quality than a lot of the roads we have here that are similar.
Mm-hmm. I always felt that our signage was better than theirs.
That's a little different. I think
It's different.
Having lived over there for 18 years, it's, I've seen it all. I've seen them build these high-speed rails that we don't have in the United States, and it's amazing. There's some amazing roads and highways, especially in Italy, that just people brag about, and you don't feel any bumps. You can drive 100 miles an hour, and it's very smooth, and you have the tolls, everything functions, and the noise protection, all that works. They spent a fortune on it. We had the Marshall Plan; they never paid us back, but we definitely, got our money's worth just because they put their money into the mass transportation.
So good. It was all designed for American tourism.
Probably, yeah.
Well, it's funny. The experience in Germany a number of years ago. There was a relatively new high-speed line called Thales that had a line that ran from Cologne to Paris and another from Amsterdam down to Paris. And we were going to take it from Aachen to Paris. And our hosts said, well, nobody takes the Thales. Only businessmen take the Thales. It's so expensive.
Yeah.
It was $89 for an adult ticket. It was $25 each for our kids. And we're like, we can't even go to New York for $89.
Exactly.
So
Do you think they can price it like that just because of the volume? Just
It's
because
social
they have
system.
more
It's
people?
not
subsidized.
It's subsidized.
Yeah.
So much subsidy. They go and they just give a lot of money to this stuff, and they pay out more and more and more.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many delays, especially on the high-speed rail that went from Rome to Naples. I mean, they uncovered all kinds of archaeological digs. I mean, it took them 10 years. How much more money they spent on that? I have no idea. They spent a fortune. There's no way they're going to get their money back.
Wow.
As far as people.
That's actually one of the things that I'm really am concerned about is sustainable infrastructure. Is just the ability to finance what you have. I used to be like a huge proponent of like, oh, we need to put something there. Oh, we need to connect these guys there. And now I'm like, every single new thing that you put in is one more financial obligation for the future.
Right.
You know, it's like.
And
This is a good video about the Dream Big, the Cities of the Future that ASC did. We should look at that and have another talk about what we think should happen.
Well, I suspect that we're going to be doing more than one podcast, but I just want to take a moment to thank you both for joining me. This is a new experiment for the Institute for Sustainable Development. We're going to call this podcast Community Futures, just because as we found out with Katrina and COVID and Helene, you tend to have kind of a K-shape run up to disasters and a K-shaped recovery afterwards, in the sense that we have some communities that seem to do much better, and others that whatever was happening before, they seem to be declining as well. So there's this idea that there's not just one future ahead for a lot of places, but potentially multiple scenarios. And really pleased, Steve Cauffman and Bill Bersing, for you both joining today to really talk about this from the hardware standpoint, the infrastructure and the skeleton and the underpinnings of it all. I think
Steve
really
probably has the same thoughts, but when you're talking about Italy and about France, I mean, I just think of the disasters they've had with, a couple of dam accidents, about the bridges that came down. If we do, and when we do this work, we have to be safe. We have to build to accordance to the standards, and the structural standards, as we were talking about, is just so important. So,
well, I wanted to kind of get your take on that, because in the United States, the American Society of Civil Engineers, and I understand you have a significant leadership role here in Virginia with regards to ASC, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's your title again?
I'm president-elect for next year, so hopefully in October, I'll be October 4th when we have our gala at UVA, I'll be the president.
I think that'd be pretty significant.
it's good to have friends in high places.
That's right. That's right. So ASCE, the civil engineers, gave the United States infrastructure collectively a C. Apparently, that's a step forward for us. But they also said that there's a $3.7 trillion deficit to bring our infrastructure really up to A levels. What do you think about that? Do you agree that we're at a C? I imagine, again, talking about a K kind of scenario, that some parts you must be like, oh man, we're doing pretty well, but in other parts you must be like sitting there saying, we got to do better. What are your reactions to hearing that we have a C report card?
What do you think?
So it's interesting, if you dig into the details, parts of the infrastructure actually look very good. Ports received a B grade, for example. Other parts of the infrastructure, wastewater, received a D. So there's a spectrum of grades for the infrastructure collectively. And I think what that's reflective of, and the report talks about this, is investments that were made as part of the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act and the the Inflation Reduction Act in infrastructure. And some of those investments, I think, will start to show up in future editions of the report card. That said, the improvement is uneven. And I was thinking about this a little bit as I was reading it. Some of the areas that improved are heavily privately owned. And so the private companies are investing because they're trying to meet demands from the market. This is true in communications. I think it's true certainly in ports. Whereas some of the other things, wastewater, I'll again use this as an example, those are generally municipally owned. Not all of them, but a lot of the wastewater infrastructure. And so the investment there is dependent on growth in the communities and the demand for services, but also the ability to collect revenue and update and maintain those operations. So you're going to see a kind of a spectrum of infrastructure investments across the board, and thus the grades that we receive.
What's your take?
I've been deeply involved we're redoing the Virginia kind of report card this year, and went to the ceremony where we said, here's a 2025, where we got from D to a C. So there are a lot of things there that are new, but we do have all this money that they gave us, Congress. We do, like you're saying, we're going to see this money trickle in and hopefully see some improvements. But in talking to the senators and congressmen who fund this stuff, they're like, okay, it's great. We're from a D to a C, but it's not really. When you look at just the bridges alone, there's 18 different sectors, and you mentioned the fact that communication, well, broadband's a new sector that we have to look at, and that's just crazy when we look at how much emphasis, how much money we have to put in it. The money that we have to put in it for broadband for all the citizens of the United States, it's tough because you have all these rural areas that you can't get to. Anyway, you look at the bridges and you think it's great, it's going from a D to a C, but now that it's at the C, you need more inspections, you need more things for safety. We were talking about safety earlier. It's just so important to do that. We need 40,000 civil engineers in the next 5 years or so. I mean, there's just saying it's an ungodly amount of engineers that we need to be able just to keep up with what we have. And that's a challenging thing. So we're approaching K through 12 and the universities and trying to get people more interested in it. I think it's a great industry. I've been in it for 30 years. So, it's...
Oh, I totally agree. As we were talking about, and I think this is going to be a topic we should really kind of dive into a little bit, every bridge, every port, every airport, et cetera, is a future financial obligation.
Yeah.
We're looking at projections that the United States will have a $50 trillion debt within 10 years, by 2035. How do we sustain, how do we keep up what we have in this regard?
Steve, you kind of touched on this a few minutes ago with your comment about concern about sustaining the infrastructure.
Yeah.
We're very good about building things. We're not necessarily quite as good at maintaining them. And part of the problem that we have is that a lot of our infrastructure was built in the post-war era, 50s and 60s, and a lot of it is reaching the end of its useful life, which means that it needs to be either repaired or replaced. And so the bill is kind of coming due all at once because of the way we've built out. So I think building more in some cases is going to be needed, but it's not always necessarily the right thing to do, because we are going to continue to have this problem of being able to have the resources to maintain and operate. And I think about it from a resilience perspective. Are we maintaining the infrastructure in a way that it performs the way it was intended?
Right.
And so that's a concern that I have going forward.
That's exactly, what we have to maintain. Talk about resilience. We need more of it. We need more. These hurricanes aren't going to stop.
Right.
The hurricane hasn't hit Virginia Beach in the Tidewater area in a long time. It's going to hit there. Sooner or later, we're going to be faced with a huge question mark. It's the biggest U.S. naval base in the world.
I think it's sexier, to your point, to start things.
Yeah.
Right. To build the new bridge, to do the new project, etc. One of the things that I'm taking from y'all is that maybe there's a lesson or two we could learn from the Europeans about maintenance, right?
Perhaps.
They do PPP, public-private partnership type stuff. They do lease construct. They do things a little bit. We do it too, but I think they do more of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I've been to projects where they've had design, build, operate, maintain, and some of these newer concepts for both building the project and then operating it and maintaining it over its lifetime. But I think those are more kind of the exception in the U.S. than the norm. That's changing, but I think it's still a difference in the way we do things.
Yeah, I just think that our financial sustainability is going to dictate a lot of our other types of our physical sustainability, the sustainability of the environment, et cetera. If we don't figure out ways to put a lot of these things on sustainable funding models, we could have that situation where they say, how did it fail? gradually than all at once, right? And I'm reminded of like the I-70 bridge in Minneapolis, right? That just kind of crashed down. One of our other fellows, Calandra Cruikshank, the CEO of Statebook, pulled up one of her interactive maps, and it showed the entire state of New Jersey blinking red in terms of like road infrastructure, like and things like that. How worried are you all that we are going to see major infrastructure fails down the
We're
road?
already seeing it in West Virginia. I mean,
Yeah.
look at the floods. I mean,
Right.
It's crazy. How do you repair a bridge that goes over an area that only has 500 people into the area? How do you justify the millions of dollars it takes to build that bridge back? Well, you can't. Sometimes you can, but it's.
I mean, even in western North Carolina, during Hurricane Helene, we had the washout of I-24. It was repaired, it was put back the way it had been, and it washed out a second time during a storm. So we're going to continue to see those kinds of failures, I think, unfortunately.
So what do we do about it?
Well, that's a big problem. You mentioned the I-70 bridge. That was a fracture critical steel truss bridge.
Inspection problem, right?
Yeah, and it was a common design approach in the 70s when it was built. There are still a number of those bridges around. I think Francis Scott Key Bridge was similar in that it was fracture critical, and once you had a failure start somewhere, it propagated quickly. And so, replacing all of those bridges is going to cost an enormous amount of money.
I had a conference at Wharton like a couple of years ago. So this will date me, but because I haven't looked at the recent numbers, I assume it's a little bit larger. But at that point, the water industry of the United States was about $50 billion, and the sanitation, hygiene, the wastewater side was $50 billion.
Yeah.
And apparently the American Society of Civil Engineers said that we're going to need $1 trillion of investment over the next 10 years to upgrade our water infrastructure.
And it's not coming out of taxpayers, it's coming out of municipals. They're just taxing what taxpayers will. They're just taxing the people. And I paid a water bill of $58. I mean, it's crazy that I have to spend this much on
Right.
this.
But we can't have another Flint, Michigan. But basically, when you're talking about $100 billion in revenue, and then you back out the actual physical infrastructure, the salaries of everybody, the electricity, all of the factors that go into making that water available or processing that wastewater, the bottom line is like 8%, something like that.
Let's put it in a different perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, if we don't do anything, what happens? If we don't do anything, we have nitrogen in our water, like this river out here, and I'm in Alexandria. We're saying, okay, our wastewater treatment facility, we're doing new things, we're doing great things here. And it was tertiary treatment. Well, I did that in Puerto Rico 20 years ago. It's not something new. We just need to do what we need to do in order to protect the fish so we can go out there and swim in this river again.
I hear you, but this is my point,
Yeah.
is that we're not talking about, something coming out of the bottom line here in terms of the infrastructure we need to fix. We're talking about taking the entire revenues of the entire industry for 10 years in order to fix it. The question really isn't, if we have another Flint, Michigan. The question will actually be when and what do we do about it, right?
Unfortunately, hurricanes and things in this world, it wakes people up.
Yeah, but even just disinvestment over years, which can occur for a number of reasons. It can occur for demographic reasons, migration, those sorts of things. That has an impact on the ability of infrastructure to operate effectively.
Right.
And so we've got to be concerned about those sorts of issues too. And do we spend, large sums of money upgrading infrastructure when you don't have the revenue stream because the demographics have changed to support that investment and maintain it.
Well, Steve, I mean, as you know, I've been very, very concerned about the hollowing out of America for a long time. What I'm picking up from what both of you are saying is that this is going to continue. It almost has to, because of the changing demographic patterns. Is that right?
It depends on the area, and what kind of happened historically is that people migrated to the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
They moved out of the cities, moved to the suburbs because they could have a house, they could have a yard. What that did was it actually, created a need for more infrastructure, because now you've got to support those homes that are being built. You've got to have the transportation networks available to get people to and from their jobs, which were still probably in the city. It changes the revenue distribution. So, people who had lived in the city and paid their water bill and things like that, now they're no longer there. So you have less revenue coming in, which means it's harder to maintain the infrastructure that's already built in that place. At the same time, you've got all this relatively new infrastructure that doesn't really cost a lot to maintain because it's brand new. And so, ultimately what happens is the bill comes due, and now you've got to, do the maintenance or replace or upgrade because the population's increased. And if you don't have the economy to support it and the local tax revenue, it's really hard to do.
Somebody told me, and I don't know what you all think about the truth or not of this, but they said that it would actually be cheaper to rip out the existing water infrastructure of New York and really rebuild it from scratch than to try and go through all of the water infrastructure and repair it in every part. And they were telling me that in some cases the water from upstate is actually being conveyed on wooden channels. Some things. That sounds to me like apocryphal, but how much are we looking at kind of the older infrastructure needing to be updated? If it goes from the 50s or 60s, then that's what, 70%?
Let's give it some thought, have a technical break here.
Okay, so picking up where we left off here, we were talking about the bill coming due with the water infrastructure, one way or another, that's going to happen. I want to switch gears a little bit though and start talking about places. Can't talk about community without talking about specific places. And I'm curious from your perspectives, because you're coming with a lot of experience from the government. Of course, you're coming with a lot of experience from the private sector. Do you all think, what's the unit that you think about in terms of infrastructure? Are you thinking about it in terms of the neighborhood, like a square block kind of situation? Are you thinking about it at the city level? Do you think about it in terms of like the metro area, the regional level, the watershed? What's kind of the unit of concern? And just explain it to me like I'm
There's so many concerns.
Explain it to me like I'm a kindergartner.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you two answers. One is that I think about it at the community level, and I'll define community as being an area where there's a governance structure in place. So think about a city, a county, something of that size. But the governance structure is important because that's the entity that can bring all the stakeholders to the table to begin thinking about what's needed. The other way to think about infrastructure, and this is because infrastructure doesn't stop necessarily at the border of the county or the city, is regionally. And regionally you can define in a number of ways. It could be across those local jurisdictional borders. It could be across state borders. It could be infrastructure that spans nationally. It can even span international borders. We buy electricity from Canada. Hydro-Quebec actually supplies energy to New England. we have supply chains between the Canadians and the Mexicans and the U.S. So, we need to think about infrastructure on a number of different scales. There's not just one scale to worry about.
How about you, Bill?
I've always thought about infrastructure as something that if we want to do it right, it needs to be all together. At NIST, in Gaithersburg, we want to put a big trench through the campus in order to put all the utilities in there, to be able to say, okay, this is it, to be able to maintain it properly. Cities need to do the same thing, but on top of that, it's always in the back of my mind, infrastructure is there for the people. So the cities need to be set up so they're comfortable. You need to have walking areas where you can walk to the stores and you can walk around, have a coffee, kind of like Europe, because I lived there so long. It's like, where's the roundabouts? We're doing that a little bit. Coffee is definitely life still in America. And, we want to make sure that our cities are done so people can be educated, they can live, we can go to work, we can come back, we don't have to drive as much, we can walk a little bit. We have the bike paths that for just exercise, but also bike paths for people to use the electric bikes. So many things are changing a little bit. The electrical bikes, all the different things that we're using now, it's getting not away from cars, but it's getting to a point where we're sitting in our house and with our neighbors, and we're going out a little more walking and a little bit more community-based, and that's it. And we were talking about it before, in order to help not just prevent to be resilient, but not just prevent the things to happen, but afterwards, if a fire happens, a disaster happens, the communities need to have already gotten together and done this.
So let me follow up with this. Virginia Beach apparently is one of the top 5 most vulnerable areas, at least from an infrastructure engineering perspective, that people talk about. How would you think about kind of the infrastructure resilience of the area? Would you break it down into the individual subunits like Steve was talking about, where you have the governance of, say, Newport News versus Norfolk versus...
Well, Virginia Beach itself would be a great interview for you, because they do a fantastic job on what they do. There's some really incredible people, even people within American Society of Civil Engineers, that are working for the city, and VDOT does a great job. What they've done for flood resilience and the way that all the water works and keeping the beach there, it's just amazing what they've done.
I would add that Norfolk actually is very forward thinking as well. Yeah. Norfolk actually has now implemented ways for flooding. There's a company out of Australia that has provided the data backbone for it. But if there is a flood anywhere in the city and you're driving, you will get an alert, and Waze will direct you around the flooded area.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's terrific, and they have
they're at sea level.
They're at sea level and sinking, but they have a chief resilience officer that started with the 100 resilient cities, but they've kept that position in place. They work with the mayor's office very closely, so they're very forward thinking.
Yeah.
My take on Virginia Beach, Norfolk, the whole area is, one, sea level rise is really going to change a lot of things, especially if you're already just at sea level. I was just down there the other day. You have a lot of low-lying areas and everything.
There are also some other areas, where I lived in Allenton, and the time that Bay Cliff, that was up a little bit, hilltop. They called it hilltop for a reason. So maybe not as much as up here, but it's still up.
Other problem that they have is subsidence. And so as sea levels rising, you've got land subsidence that's occurring at the same time. And so that part of the coast is at risk because the changes are occurring faster there than anywhere else.
Can you explain a little bit about how subsidence works?
Well, subsidence is simply the land is sinking, right? So that's what it really means. How it occurs can come about for different reasons. I think in Virginia Beach and Norfolk area, it's mainly because of water extraction, groundwater.
Yeah, that, and the plants aren't there, and this and that. There's some really, Clark Nixon, I think, is one of the companies that does an amazing job when it comes to, doing, just being preventative and putting plants and making sure that everything's out there for
If you look
environmental
at New
impact.
Orleans, in that area, a lot of it is oil and natural gas extraction that is driving the land subsidence.
Well, that would make sense. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so if you're taking stuff out of a certain volume, it'll naturally kind of go out. But one of my thoughts, predicates on this, is that Virginia was really designed, the infrastructure of Virginia was really designed based on political and military considerations, and the idea that all roads led to Richmond. And as a result of that, you don't really have kind of a straight shot between the number one economic unit of the state, which is Northern Virginia, and the number two, which is the Hampton Roads area. And there's a lot of challenges from an economic standpoint unpacking Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads. But I would actually submit that Hampton Roads should be the economic engine of Virginia. And I attribute some of this to the way that the infrastructure has been configured up until now.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Possibly, although I think because of some of the changes, some of the industries that are there are beginning to move out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So let's talk about other places that you all are particularly kind of keeping your eyes on. You know, Bill, are there, from your perspective, which areas of the United States would you be like, oh, okay, we got to really do something here?
Well, Florida,
Talk
you know,
about
if you talk about hurricanes, you know, my brother went through 4 hurricanes, you know, going through his house, really, just 1 year. So, yeah, I mean, they did a great job. Not many people died, you know, this year for the hurricanes. You know, we've had a couple, but, you know, that they do a fantastic job. But they still need to do a little bit more. Texas, Louisiana, you know, we were talking to David Dodd. It's, you know, Louisiana is definitely a place. Then there's South Carolina, North Carolina, you know, that were devastated by that hurricane that went through there. We're also doing, you know, Camp Lejeune and, you know, these other military bases are still going through reconstruction,
Right.
You know. And then you look at, it's just so many aspects, you know, you look at California with the fires and what we need to do to just, I don't know, they're doing a great job, in my opinion, because we don't hear about it so much in the news anymore, but they're still devastated, you know. That's tough. And then, you know, the tornadoes going through just the whole United States. It's going up and up and up and up, and that's not going to stop anytime soon either. Yeah, Puerto Rico's another one. Man.
Yeah, so like you were saying, if you get an education in engineering, the work is never going to end.
It's there, yeah. Yeah, we need some engineers, though, that's for sure.
But
Now-
let me build off of Bill's observations. You know, Florida has been very aggressive since Hurricane Andrew in improving their building codes. And so a lot of the improvement in performance, particularly of housing and smaller buildings, is due to those improved building codes. And I've seen it-
Self-inflicted, though, because they didn't do what they needed to do, and then
Right,
hurricanes came
exactly.
along and buildings fell, and NIST kind of investigated, right?
NIST-
Do you know those guys who did that?
Yeah, I've been down there myself.
Oh, were you? Okay.
I was
Yeah.
down in the Keys in Miami after Hurricane Irma.
Yeah.
I was in North Carolina after Hurricane Matthew.
Wow.
You did a study on Lumberton, right?
We did a longitudinal study on Lumberton. So we went down after Hurricane Matthew, collected data, and then about a year later, Hurricane Florence hit. And so the team, I had actually left NIST and moved to CISA at the time, but the team went back and collected data, and they're still collecting data on the recovery.
Wow.
And so are there like lessons learned or things you can share still, or do you have to wait until the study's completed?
No, and you know, I haven't been following it closely, so I won't speak for my
The
colleagues
current,
at
present,
NIST.
yeah.
But they've been collecting data, I think, on an annual basis since Hurricane Matthew on recovery. And so there are certainly lessons learned. They look specifically at residential housing, I know we looked at schools, we looked at small businesses in the local economy.
Right up your alley.
Yeah.
No.
Well, so let me ask you all this. There's a lot of myths, misconceptions, fear, optimism about geoengineering. And a lot of, when people talk about geoengineering, they're thinking about shooting particles into the atmosphere a lot of times, you know. Let's recreate a volcano in Iceland effect kind of things. It doesn't seem to me like there's a lot of understanding about geoengineering from a thing of like working with mountains to reduce the idea of flood risk, right? Or it sounds to me like beach replenishment is really becoming a science now. But you see these maps, these projections of Florida, like losing half of its landmass, etc. Can you share a little bit about your thoughts about geoengineering in terms of working between the natural and the built environments? Can Florida, the basic question I guess is, can Florida be saved?
Well, it's like the boiling frog syndrome, you know. It's going, but you know, is it going to be tomorrow? No, it's going to be in 50 years. And if it's in 50 years, I mean, can we do things in order to help, you know, that erosion? Yeah, we can put things out, and even out into the water, we can put these big concrete things to help the erosion. We haven't done that yet. We haven't done the bulkheads that's needed. There are a lot of things that they haven't done in Florida because they didn't need it.
But keep in mind, the other thing about Florida is it sits on limestone. And it's porous, so the water doesn't always come just from the shore, it comes up through the ground.
Right.
So with sea level rise, the concern is not just water coming from the beaches, but actually water coming up through the ground and then remaining. And so that's going to be a problem, and I don't know how you geoengineer that problem away.
Big pumps, man.
Big pumps.
World Trade Center, man. They put a bunch of big pumps in there to get that water out. They're still down below there, I think.
They did. Yeah. But there's an intersection in Miami Beach where they installed a pump.
Yeah.
I've been there. There's a restaurant on the corner. I met a colleague of mine who lives in the area there, and some other people. And we were talking about it. About a year later, there was a flood, and the power went off. And there was no generator at that pump site. So here, there's this beautifully designed
it's all nice
system didn't work.
Yeah, that's
right.
horrible.
So
Right.
there are always going to be vulnerabilities. We can engineer, but there are always vulnerabilities that exist.
So, I've been working on critical infrastructure for like 25 years, and one of the most ghoulish conversations that I ever had was, this was before Y2K. Right, this is a long time ago. We had some of the different infrastructures around a table, and you had the banks, the tech guys, the gas, the rails. You can get the picture, and they were comparing how fast the country would shut down if their particular infrastructure ceased to function.
Yeah, it's not just one.
It's not
all
one. It's the interdependency. It's how these infrastructures work together. So you can have a fantastic pump, generator goes.
Well, think about
you got problems.
Well,
Superstorm Sandy.
Yeah.
Power was off. People needed fuel for their cars. They could not use a credit card because there was no point of sale transaction available.
Right.
And the gas pumps didn't work.
Right.
So,
there's no pump.
There's no pump. Yeah, you can't. There's no hand pump.
Yeah.
So you're stuck. Those are the kinds of things that, dependencies and interdependencies that need to be thought through. So something as simple as the power being off has this cascading consequence that occurs.
Not only that, but there are certain, maybe countries, but people that prey on this.
Right.
So if something happens to the electricity grid, wow, they're all over it. They're making it even worse for us. They're, going out in the news and causing panic and this and that. It's just horrible.
How worried are you guys about cyber attacks and about human attacks?
Very worried. I mean, just here in the area, we had the Colonial Pipeline incident a few years ago, and what was interesting about it is the cyber attack was on their billing system. It was not on the actual operational technology of the pipeline. But if you can't charge for fuel that you sell, you can't sell fuel, and so it resulted in a shutdown of the pipeline for I think 3 days until that issue got resolved and they were able to restart and supply fuel.
I know there are parts of the government that actually look at how different systems are connected to each other, and understanding you can shut down the power of the Eastern Seaboard not by directly attacking one of the power companies, but the thing adjacent to it, like next door to it. There's actually like a government agency. There was a government program, I don't know if it still exists, where they were really trying to look at the integrity of the energy grid, and they traced down a vulnerability to a single farm in a single place in Kansas. In the future, I'm going to have the person who ran that program as a guest.
You should,
really
because they can tell you more than we should
about
probably even allude.
But in terms of cyber, are there good defenses?
Well, I think, certainly organizations that have resources have pretty good cyber defenses in place. And there's more and more work being done now to really think about, if an attack is successful, how do we respond and recover from that attack? So NIST has done a lot of work in this area. They've published not only the cybersecurity framework, but a number of other publications related to the cybersecurity framework to address these concerns. So there's a lot of information and guidance available to address cybersecurity concerns. That said, I mean, it's still obviously an issue, and the more automation is used in infrastructure, the more attack surfaces become available as points of entry. So it's definitely something I think that we need to worry about.
You give us a ray of sunshine and then you take it away.
Well, it's not just the United States. I mean,
Exactly.
Look at our friends in Europe. Look at our friends in Canada and everywhere else. I mean, in some aspects, if they are impacted, so are we. The economy impacted, we're going to be impacted. So, hopefully, I believe that we're leading the way forward, but we still have a lot of way to go, and we still need to cooperate with our friends and allies.
Bill, when you take on a project, do you think about can this system function if there's a blackout?
We always do that for our programs.
You embed physical.
Yeah, there's no way. I mean, these newer
circuit breakers, so to speak, so that one of the things that the prepper community likes to talk about in terms of post-apocalyptic scenarios is either a coronal mass ejection or a powerful EMP kind of wiping out kind of the electric grid. Right?
I'm more concerned about that one guy who goes into the baggage handling units of the airport and puts in a thumb drive and then controls the lights on the runway. I mean, that's what we need to be concerned about, not just here in the U.S., but in the vulnerable places and areas outside of the U.S.
You're a ray of sunshine too.
Sorry about that. Yeah. I think that we're doing this, but we're not doing it to the level that the existing infrastructure needs to be at.
So I want to continue to talk about kind of the challenges and the problems that we have to take into account for our critical infrastructure. But then I do want to shift over to, promising ideas like AI and, advanced materials, et cetera. But before we move to kind of what the potential opportunities, what other threats and vulnerabilities are you both concerned about?
I can just rattle them all.
well, why don't you? And then we'll unpack.
Well, BIM, Building Information Management Services. I'm just concerned about the infrastructure, for these, not just buildings, but now we're managing multiple buildings on a campus or a base or a community, and they're all integrated, and they're all controlled by 1, 10, 15 different manufacturers, and they all have access because, it's like my Jeep, the Jeep Chrysler, they can come up and say, hey, you need to get your oil changed. Well, how do they know that?
Yeah.
I didn't tell them, but I have a link between me and them. So does everybody else who buys a brand new Jeep. Same thing with your Carrier, air conditioning unit. It's definitely something that it's great, but because of technology, it is something that's a vulnerable area.
That's right.
And that's just one of 50, things that we need to be careful of. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I worry about the same thing. We've introduced all these entry points. So, managing all of those entry points is a challenge from a cybersecurity perspective.
It's a too many cooks problem?
No, it's not necessarily a too many cooks problem. It is just that we've, in a lot of cases, we've implemented automation capabilities from multiple vendors that are, because of the way that the infrastructure is often operated, they're siloed, and so there might be something happening in one part of the operation that is not easily seen in other parts, or not easily seen kind of in the overall operational picture. So that's a concern. And then I worry about physical vulnerabilities a lot too. Like we've talked about earlier, I think a lot of our infrastructure either was not designed for the threats that we're facing today, or it has aged and degraded so that it's not actually going to perform the way we think it will perform, and thus we have these disasters. And if you look at a lot of what we call disasters happening, they're not at the design level event. They are below design level, but something fails, and that creates the conditions that lead to the disaster.
It's all about those inspections that you have structurally, and I'd like to kind of chime in on that one, because we have these structural drawings, we have these things, we have these tests, and sometimes we have to validate that they actually did the testing, and all this third party that actually did all the testing. And we're like scratching our head. Did you really do that? Did you do the whole area? Did you test this? If you didn't, we have to dig down, that's 20 inches of concrete to get to that base level because you didn't check it, and we're not sure that you did it. So you have to do that again and again and again. Are they doing that third-party checking? Maybe you have a better understanding than I do, but I don't think we're doing it to the level that we need to do it. We need to geospace this thing along that user technology to be able to do that. In saying this, we have new buildings, we have older buildings, we have the as-built for the older buildings, we have these structural drawings that are there. I could take this thing and throw it in AI and find the most vulnerable part to be able to blow it up. It's horrible. It's something that I'm just saying, I don't want to give anybody ideas, but somebody has to think about it.
Yeah, the everything has a downside, but maybe there's a silver lining for some of the upside. And one of the things you're making me think about is whether or not we should design failure better into the system. You know how they talk about in tech fast fails, like with startups and stuff like that? Maybe part of our resilience is to allow infrastructure to fail in a safe way so that we can actually replace it with new, better infrastructure in the future. We sort of do that. Okay. In a way. A lot of building design is based on... But intentionally.
Yeah, no, they have some great computer programs that do this stuff.
And it's based on a minimum standard of life safety, right? So in the U.S., we design buildings to preserve human life. Now, they may be beyond repair in an event, earthquake, hurricane, but the idea is that the building remains sound to enable people time to escape and survive. And that's the design philosophy that we use here in the United States. That's changing somewhat because we have buildings that are more important. And so there's a lot of work that's going on, ASCE is involved and others, to look at functional resilience. where the building is not only able to remain standing, but it's able to continue to function and perform the function that it typically performs, either immediately or continuously or in a short period of time. So our design philosophy is evolving to kind of meet the demands of the current environment.
Right. So how concerned are you about climate change and or cyclical changes in climate and weather? You know, you hear about, some people tend to think climate change is like a straight line, like it's going to go, you know, X, Y, or Z. If something was arid, it's going to become more arid. If something was wet, it's going to become more wet. But like, there have been past ages of disasters. I mean, the Oklahoma Dust Bowl of the 1930s is so impactful, it's like ingrained in American literature, right? But of course, we're talking about different things now. How much is this on y'all's radar screen in terms of, are we, like, let me explain further. You know, the military is always ready for the last war. So coming out of Vietnam, everybody was like thinking about jungle warfare, and then you get Iraq, which is totally a different thing, right? How much are we like projecting out for things that we know in the past, as opposed to being ready for different contingencies, like hurricanes hitting Los Angeles or things like that?
Well, I think that's evolving. You know, the standards evolve with time, and you know, and I think our building standards actually are quite good, and our building codes that reference the standards are excellent.
Thanks to NIST.
Thanks to NIST and thanks
and
to
ASE
and a lot of private sector participants. So.
Suck up.
Well, I think it's true.
I think leading the world, I believe that's true too. I mean, there are international standards, but you guys are leading,
right? But I think the issue is that the conditions are changing, and we can adapt to a point. And you know, if you follow the trend lines for climate change, they're continuing to trend up, even if you have, you know, blips,
variations,
and so we will be able to continue to, you know, update our standards and adapt to a point. But without mitigation, we're going to reach a point where we're no longer able to adapt to conditions. And
give us some examples of mitigation.
Well, when I say mitigation here, I'm talking about mitigation of emissions. You know, because we've got two sides of the equation. There's what's driving climate change to begin with, carbon emissions, and we've got the adaptation piece, which is trying to adapt what we build to meet those changing conditions. And we can adapt to a point, but if we don't mitigate, then, you know, we're going to reach a point where we're no longer able to adapt our buildings.
Yeah, but see, I mean, this has been one of my problems with the whole mitigation strategy, is that in order for it to really work, you need India, China, Russia, Saudi. You need a whole bunch of folks that don't necessarily have those kind of interests at heart. So it's almost like, from my logic is it's a tragedy, the commons problem, and people are going to do what they're going to do. We have to figure out ways to help kind of our local places. I just feel like the horse is out of the barn, or whatever the saying is on some of that. So that's
and you can look at you know, the ice, I guess in Alaska or something, they dug down, and they look at the ice every 15 years. You have something. There's going to be something. It's going to go up and down. We're probably going up like this, but no matter if you agree with this,
you get an Icelandic volcano.
Yeah, no matter if you agree with it, you know, of global warming or not, or having the argument that somebody else is, why should we do it? Everybody should agree that fossil fuels should be eliminated. It doesn't do anything good to put all these carbons in the atmosphere. Right. Everybody agrees to that, even the right side, the left side, whoever, right? So how do we go about
Well,
doing is the question.
I think about it just from a basic pollution standpoint.
Exactly.
What do you want to be breathing in?
Yeah, but then we get China to do all our stuff, and they're polluting everything to be able to do it. I mean, I don't want to palm this up, to make iPhones over in China and then kill some Chinese people. I don't like that. I don't like the idea of, having all of our materials and things made in a different country just because they have slacker or lack the environmental or the understanding that, hey, they're going to kill a bunch of people with cancer.
Yeah, but so assuming the horse is out of the barn, etc., adaptation becomes really, really critical, right?
Well, we're going to have to adapt no matter what. Right?
How do you deal with like Charleston, where a
Carolina,
decade or two ago there was like 8 days of flooding, and now apparently there's something like 200 days of flooding and stuff like that.
Yeah, our 100-year storms are now like, or 5-year storms or 1,000-year storms.
So adaptation. Like, can we afford it?
Well, I think the other thing, we don't communicate risk well. The 100-year storm is a terrible way to communicate risk.
Right.
That's the way we were educated. You too, probably.
I mean,
that we were like, here's a 5-10, and then we were just like, that's the way the books were written.
I have been in the field and talked to people who have said, well, that was 100-year. I mean, we're standing in front of a building that is gone.
Right.
Except for the concrete steps leading up to the front porch that is no longer
Yeah,
there.
they're crying.
And they said, well, that was a 100-year storm. It'll never happen again in my lifetime. So we're just going to rebuild what we had.
Are you seeing that with North Carolina right now with Helene?
I don't have enough experience to say that I'm seeing that. I think I see, what I have seen is, a real kind of move toward we've got to do something different.
Finally.
Yeah, well, I mean, there were places that were not even in the 500-year floodplain, supposedly, that flooded.
Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of, contributing factors as to why that occurred. Debris backing up and causing flooding, things like that. But the point is that we don't communicate risk very well, right? So if people think 100-year storm, if something happens, they're thinking that storm won't occur again for 100 years. Well, the reality is there's a 1% chance of occurring every year. And if you compound that over the life of a typical mortgage, then you're looking at about a 33% chance.
It's a bad bet.
Occurring. Well, it's
just to think of it as 1 in 100 years.
And it's not just 1 in 100 years anymore. Those storms that we predicted 1 in 100 are now 1 in 5.
That's what we were talking about earlier, about active versus dynamic ways of thinking this.
Oh yeah, dynamic would be. Yeah.
Ellicott City, was it 2016?
2 and 3 years, right?
In 2 years. In 2 years.
Crazy.
And they were almost identical in terms of the impacts. The storm dynamics were different, but the impacts to the historic district were very similar.
Okay, so assuming we still have people sticking with us who've not been completely frightened out of their mind, let's talk about kind of the upside of things. Where are you optimistic about changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think Texas sat beside a guy who was a lady who was the president of ASCE, in Texas, Houston, I think, or Austin. Houston, and they were like, hey, we have all kinds of good things, all kinds of city. We're putting roundabouts. We're doing things differently. They're building their cities and their infrastructure differently. Those are really cool. We need to come up and have a discussion with some of those planners who have the insight of what they're doing in the city and the county planning stages and how they're improving the lives of people in their community, because they're doing a great job.
The design level is hopefully a ray of sunshine here.
Well, I think to Bill's point, rethinking the way we design our cities and counties.
It's this thing right here. Dream big. It's on YouTube, I think, too.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that is changing is awareness of what the threats really are. And I'll just share an anecdote. I was in Portland, Oregon for a meeting several years ago, and I was meeting a colleague, and so I'd just gone down to the hotel bar for a minute before I went to dinner with him. And this woman sat down next to me, and we started talking. And she asked me what I did, and I told her, and we started talking about the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake threat.
As one does.
As one
when
does.
they're
Yeah,
having
yeah,
a
we
drink.
Yeah, when you're having a drink with someone you've never met. And she said, well, I'm being told I should have a generator. I said, where do you live? She said, well, I live in a high-rise condo. And I said, well, you don't need a generator. Your building should have a generator, but you don't
need a
one."
parachute.
But, the point of the story is that here was, just an average citizen who was aware that, she needed to do something to prepare for the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And I think that...
How much did y'all have to drink?
I was only there for, 15, 20 minutes.
You had 6 drinks.
Man, those shots work fast.
But, I think that awareness of the threat is beginning to change. And as that occurs, people will demand better. And I think that's kind of...
Well, AI is like, everybody's aware of it now. You can just, throw it in AI and then say, hey, what is it? And as a community leader, you're not struck by, hey, this is something new to me, because you've already come up with the top 10 risks, Doesn't take much to do it now. It's great.
So
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I have a couple of theories of scenarios of the future. And one, of course, is I think buildings are going to start being redesigned with piers coming out of the second, third, fourth floors, so that drones can land.
I mean, like Saudi Arabia's doing,
right?
The whole
That one of the
the
things
line,
that's going to happen is houses and buildings are going to
with plants too, infrastructure. With,
who knows, right? But the other one is that we're going to start talking about like the tech rights, the IT rights to roads, and that one of the ways that people will start paying for some of their infrastructure is by renting out kind of different kinds of rights than before because of AI, etc., coming through, and maybe new forms of energy conveyance. If we do eliminate fossil fuels and electric power becomes a thing, I'm really interested in maybe potentially we have self-charging roads, and if you have autonomous vehicles, maybe we don't need, or we can reconfigure our rails. We start reconfiguring our highways to take advantage of some of the tech side of it. One of the other pieces of this that I'm curious about is advanced materials. How excited are you all about that part?
Well, let's backtrack a little. So the energy and all that, there's no one answer to this, but hydrogen, amazing technology, amazing things we're doing with it. Amazing opportunity right there. I don't know where it's going to end because we're electric cars, but hydrogen's a good thing. The small modular nuclear reactors are just awesome. I'd love to get in an infrastructure project to be able to make sure it's not 10 years of development, but 3, because we can do it. In construction program management, I guarantee if you gave me that project, we could do it in 3 years. They're saying, no, it's going to take 10, but no, it's not. And then you have all the other things. I think we're too far to the pendulum with the wind, because it's an eyesore, in my opinion. Maybe others, and maybe it's good out and about, and out in the oceans and this and that. But it's still something that it's not as far as environmentally the best solution with the birds.
Distributed energy solutions is a part of the idea for optimism.
Natural gas too.
It's part of the reason for optimism.
Yeah.
Yeah, distributed energy. I'm also a fan of the SMRs. And there are several companies that are, aggressively working to get their SMRs tested, demonstrated, so that they can begin installing them.
I've seen a couple that are just really safe.
Yeah.
It's like not like when our parents were growing up.
Right.
It's definitely something that you just look at it, you're like, okay, that makes sense. Even the waste is very taken care of. You got a 50-year, kind of tube that you don't have to do anything
Right.
for.
So, obviously, we're coming, because of the debt constraints, et cetera, we're coming into a situation where the federal government's going to be able to do less and less, no matter what, right? Just $50 trillion coming down the pike. And you already see states like Hawaii that has the highest tax burden of any state, and has the worst infrastructure. in some ways. Some it's world class, of course, but they keep talking about like the poor performance of government services. If y'all were czars, and I'm going to start with you first on this one, Bill, because if you were kind of the United States infrastructure czar. Oh, and sidebar, why is it that we have a Department of Transportation and Department of Energy, but we don't have a Department of Infrastructure? Does that make sense to y'all?
Well, I think it's historical. It's the way things have grown up. But you're right. I mean, there is.
I've been scratching my head about that.
Well, and I ran across this issue years ago where we were trying to look at seismic safety for various infrastructure sectors, and there was a center of gravity for energy, but there was no center of gravity for water. And
the 7 state standards, maybe. No?
Yeah, but not
that would be
federal,
wastewater.
Not at the federal level.
No.
Yeah, EPA sort of. They have some role, but it's mostly in regulation for safety and pollution as opposed to the infrastructure itself. That is an issue, and I think it's largely just a function of how the federal government developed over time to meet the needs of the country.
There's definitely a new organization structure, virtual executive leadership, and things you can do virtually now with organization structure. It may entail some federal oversight, but it's more the states. People need to talk to each other. We need to have leadership, and it's not from the federal government. It's from the corporations. We need to get more leadership and more talking between the different companies that are impacted, because they have an interest. Not just an interest in making their company grow, but an interest to helping their employees, helping the people live better. And until they get that and not be separated and told, hey, just give me a bunch of money, nobody's going to have the buy-in to that.
So, assuming that you're not going to be the first Secretary of Infrastructure, but say you are the infrastructure advisor on the Domestic Policy Council, what are like the top 2 or 3 things that you would recommend to increase the country's risk tolerance, resilience, and also open up opportunities for these small towns and areas that may be getting left behind now?
I honestly don't think we understand it enough to be able to go down and say, you need to do this, that, and another. I think we need to come up with an idea of saying, okay, virtually, here's a group of people to understand the risks, understand what, because it's A, B, and C, or it's 1 through 10, the level of community involvement for infrastructure and for resilience is not standard throughout the U.S. We saw this with the fires. The California communities were just there. They were on it, man. They were just within, a week. They were like, okay, yeah, this is how we get back to business. But then you look to West Virginia and you look to other states, and they get pounded by flooding rains or a hurricane that came over for a different area, and their organization and their community isn't as resilient, I guess you could say. So those have to be studied in a little bit more in order to be able to put the right infrastructure to help them, whether it's the federal government or it's a state or it's a group of states that gets together, because I'm sure Virginia, North Carolina, West Virginia, these areas, Tennessee, they could come up with good solutions for these people.
Yeah, Bill, listening over the course of this conversation, education, understanding, investigation has been a through line in a lot of your commentary. I do think if they ever did set up the cabinet agency for infrastructure, that looking at interdependencies and having like a strategic planning function or a strategic assessment function, whatever you want to call it, is probably a baseline need.
Risk analysis, risk assessment. You do a lot in NIST about this.
Yeah, and I think what's missing is a national vision, call it, for what a resilient nation looks like. And that probably is the foundational document. We need to have, an overall policy direction for what a resilient nation is and what it looks like. And then from that flows the what do you do to achieve the vision.
We also need to look at other countries. There are other countries that are doing a hell of a lot better job than we are for this flood resilience and all these things that we're talking about. And Singapore comes to mind. You look at Qatar. You were talking about buildings and how you maintain the buildings. I was there in Qatar when they were like, okay, we have all these buildings, but we didn't realize it's going to cost us a bunch of money to maintain all these things.
Right.
But they did it. They confronted it. Of course, they have the money to do it, but they were able to do that. So there are other areas, there are other things that we can cooperate with. I mean, we're known as the experts in these things, but maybe we need to cooperate and try to find other solutions in other countries that can help us with our problems.
Well, gentlemen, I really want to thank you all. This has been an amazingly wide-ranging conversation, but they always say that you should leave making people want more. It sounds to me like we have a lot to unpack in future conversations about what some of these things should look like, whether it's benchmarking other countries, whether it's looking at kind of the baseline of what it means to be a resilient nation. There's a lot more to talk about. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
This is Stephen Jordan with Community Futures, and we thank you for watching.